Welcome everyone to this Great Place to Work webinar. I hope you're all well. We will wait a few seconds to let people in the room. Very good. So for the weather update on my side, I'm in the south of France at the moment. It's already 34 degrees in the morning, so I guess we'll be melting down today again. So in the chat function, just let us know where you're based, what's the weather on your side, and if you can hear me loud and clear, that would be great. Okay, great. Good morning, Catherine. Morning, Mick. Morning, Fania. Okay, very good. Cork, Limerick, Croatia. Very good. People from all over the world. That's really, really good. Good. So for this morning, I'll be your host. I'm Marina, marketing and brand manager at Great Place to Work. So I can see everyone coming in the room. That's great. We're going to start now about this webinar about change in the workplace. Before we go into the webinar, I have some updates for you. We have one event coming in September, an exclusive to client, on the 28th of September in Dublin City Centre. So mark your calendars. It will be a morning of content and networking. And if you're a Great Place to Work client, you will receive your invite by email very shortly. Also a reminder that there are a few list deadlines coming up by the end of the year. So get certified by October the 10th to be eligible for Best Workplaces in Pharma and Healthcare 2023, released in November. And for Best Workplaces in Ireland and Best Workplaces for Women 2024, the deadline to be certified is the 15th of December 2023. The survey slots are being booked very quickly this year again, so hurry up if you haven't signed up or renewed already. And for the clients already renewed, you're automatically considered for these recognition if you reach certification. And lastly, a reminder that we are releasing more episodes on the Red Cube podcast, our podcast channel, available on Spotify and other platforms. The next episode will be with Salesforce, so be sure you're subscribed to the channel to receive the latest episode. So for today's webinar, we are joined by Catherine Monaghan, Senior HR Consultant at Action HR Services, to talk about the newest employment law changes, and by John Patrick Shaw, Ireland's head of Carelon Global Solutions Ireland, to discuss how they manage their rebranding. During this webinar, ask your question in the chat and Q&A function, and we'll try to cover as many as we can at the end of the session. We will also be sharing the slides and the recording at the end by email. So to start off, we have Catherine Monaghan. She's been a member of the CIPD for 20 years and is currently a chartered member. She's trained mediator and trainer, and some of you already know Catherine as she's coaching hospitality businesses, especially part of the Fulcher Ireland Employer Excellence Programme. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for joining today. How are you?
Hi, I'm fantastic. Delighted to be here, Marina. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks very much. So, Catherine, you have a key mission today is to update people in the call on the latest and upcoming changes in the HR law. So what do we need to keep in mind this year?
Well, there's a lot of changes this year, and I'm going to take you through them in detail. I know that you have me on a time schedule, Marina, so I need to make sure that I get through them quickly. So we're going to have a look at the European Union Transparent and Predictable Working Regulations, the Sick Leave Act that everybody's familiar with, the Protected Disclosures Amendment Act, and the Work-Life Balance and Miscellaneous Provisions Act. So you can see there's a lot there. And if I have time at the end, I would like to give the audience an overview of legislation that's in the pipeline at the moment, which is of great interest to a lot of the audience today. I would say the Employment Permits Bill, the Automatic Enrolment Retirement Savings System Bill, and the Living Wage Bill. That's what I have today for us. And without further ado, I will start the ball rolling. So we're going to start with the European Union Transparent and Predictable Working Conditions Regulations. And these were signed into law on the 16th of December last year. And I will say that they actually took us all by surprise. While we were expecting the regulations, we weren't expecting them, I suppose, so quickly. So the purpose of these is to protect individuals in all forms of work by promoting more transparent and predictable employment, but at the same time making sure that employers were able to adapt to the labour market. Now, the changes brought about a lot of obligations for employers, and I'm going to go through just the key changes this morning, if that's okay. So first of all, the regulations provide for 2 information deadlines. So this is around contracts of employment. So before, employers were required to provide employees with 5 core terms of employment within 5 days of commencement of employment. Now, this obligation has been extended in the sense that employers are now required to provide employees with 10 core terms within the first 5 days. And previously, employers were provided to give the full contract of employment or the remaining terms and conditions within 2 months. And this now deadline has changed to 1 month. And again, there's additional information that has to be given to the employees within this 1 month time frame. There's also changes to the written statement that has to be given to employees that work outside Ireland, and changes for posted workers. And the regulations very helpfully outline the form of statement that is to be provided to employees. So it needs to be in writing, it needs to be signed by the employer and dated, and it actually lets us know that we can give it to employees in paper or in an electronic format, provided it's accessible to the employee. We can store and print it, and we keep a record of that receipt. And now, previously, again, if we wanted to make a change to the information we provide to employees, we had to do it within 1 month. And now we have to do it on or before the date the change takes place. So you can see already there's a lot of change around information deadlines and contracts of employment. Now, there's been much talk about probationary periods, and we all know that previously there was no legislation requiring an employer to limit the length of a probationary period. But these new regulations state that where an employee is subject to a probationary period, then it can't exceed 6 months for people working in the private sector, and then 12 months for those working in the public sector. However, it does state that they can be longer, but it must be on an exceptional basis. And where such a longer period needs to be in the employee's interests, but in any case, they can't exceed 12 months. And again, interestingly, it does state that if an employee is absent due to a specified provision, then the probationary period can be extended for the length of that absence. Now, what's a specified provision? Some of you might ask, well, that's any of those protected leaves. So, for example, maternity leave, adoptive leave, parental, parents, paternity, carers, etc. And it also provides us with information around fixed-term contracts and probationary periods. So what the regulations state is that if an employee is on a fixed-term contract, that probationary period must be proportionate to the length of the contract and to the nature of the work. And it also says that if you're going to renew that fixed term contract for the same role, then that renewal should not have a probationary period because there was already one previously. The regulations also talk about transition to more predictable work. So what that means is when an employee who has completed their probationary period has at least 6 months service, if available, they can request the employer to move them to more predictable and secure working conditions. And if they do that, the employer must reply within 1 month of the request, and an employee can make that request once in any 12-month period. Now, I know a lot of our contracts of employment previously have had exclusivity clauses in them, as in you can only work for that employer and not another employer. And in the regulations, they talk about this, they name this as parallel employment. So the regulations state that an employer shouldn't prohibit an employee from working for another employer or treat an employee adversely for taking up work with another employer. That's a big change. However, the regulations do go on to say that the employer can restrict the employee from working for another employer where it's proportionate and based on objective grounds. And what they call this is an incompatibility restriction. And if an employer wants to impose an incompatibility restriction on the employee, then they need to outline the details of that restriction and the objective grounds on which it is based to the employee in the written contract, or alternatively in a separate written statement. And very helpfully, the regulations give a list of what those objective grounds look like. And they include things like for health and safety reasons, for protecting business confidentiality, avoiding conflicts of interest, etc. But there's a long list of those objective grounds. So I would encourage you to have a look at those if you want to allow an employee to work or restrict an employee from working for another employer. Now, this is a big change. I certainly know from some of the businesses I've been speaking to, mandatory training. So if you as an employer are required by law to provide training to an employee to carry out the role, or you're required by a collective agreement, that training must be provided to the employee free of cost, count as working time, and where possible, take place during working hours. And then finally, under this legislation, it amends the regulations, amend the Organisation of Working Time Act Section 17. And that Section 17 states that employees must be given a minimum notice period of 24 hours of their work assignment. However, the new regulations also state that any work assignment notified to an employee must take place within the reference hours and days. So you must give the employee those reference hours and days as part of the written statement. And if either you don't give them the 24 hours notice or the work assignment is outside those reference hours and days, then the employee has the right to refuse that work assignment without adverse consequences. So you can see all of these changes, and if you haven't updated your contracts of employment, you should do so, and also your company's policies and procedures to make sure that those changes are reflected in them. So I'm going to move on now to the Sick Leave Act, and I know everybody's very familiar with this act, so I'm just going to touch on it extremely briefly. It was enacted on the 1st of January this year, and it entitles employees to a maximum of 3 days of employer-paid sick leave in any one calendar year, provided the employee has 13 weeks of continuous service and they submit a medical cert to cover that sick leave. And that entitlement is to increase to 5 days in 2024, 7 in 2025, and 10 days by 2026. And from a payment perspective, the employer is required to pay 70% of the employee's normal wages, subject to a maximum of €110 per day. Now, the legislation also states that if the company, so any of you that have a sick leave policy in place, and your terms are as or more favourable than what the legislation states, then you don't need to pay an additional 3 days to the employee. So now let's look at the Protected Disclosures Amendment Act. And this act, protected disclosures, are what we all know as whistleblowing. And people will be definitely familiar with that term. And Ireland has had legislation in this arena since 2014, actually. Now, this Protected Disclosures Amendment Act transposes the EU Whistleblowing Directive. And what it does is it significantly enhances the protection for whistleblowers in Ireland. So what's the requirement already? Well, the requirement for organisations that have 250 employees or more, they should have now formal internal challenge and procedures for their workers to make protected disclosures since 1st of January. And for organisations with 50 or more, the same requirement. They will have to have internal challenge and procedures for their workers to make protected disclosures from 17th of December of this year. So what are the main aspects of the Act or the main changes to that previous Act? Well, firstly, it extends or widens the scope of those who can make a protected disclosure, very interestingly, to include people that aren't even employees. So, for example, you can see here for persons applying for a job. So if a person is applying for a job, is in the recruitment process or in pre-contractual negotiations, and they come across or get information with regards to relevant wrongdoing, then they can actually make a protected disclosure. Persons undergoing training, shareholders, members of boards, and volunteers. Also, examples of penalisation have been expanded to include negative performance assessments, failure to renew a temporary contract, harm to reputation via social media, and psychiatric or medical referrals. So I would advise employers to make sure that they keep good records, and they should have an objective justification for any acts that they take in this regard. And also, I suppose it's worth noting that there's now a reversal of burden of proof, in that employers will now have to disprove penalisation claims. And then you can see the list. I'm not going to go through them in detail. Actually, I meant to say you will get a copy of the slides after the webinar, so you'll have all this to review. But they expand also the categories of relevant wrongdoing that can be reported, and you can see the list here. And the Act also makes a number of amendments to both the channels and the procedures for making a disclosure. So there's a lot of change in this regard. Just to say very briefly that if you have got a procedure on protected disclosures or a policy, you should look at it and amend it in relation to the new legislation. And if you haven't one in place and you've 50 or more employees, I would advise to get working on that now, so you have it in place by the 17th of December. And this is a piece of legislation, the Work-Life Balance and Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2023. This is our most recent piece of legislation, and it was signed into law by the President on the 4th of April. Now, some of this legislation is already enacted or has commenced, and some hasn't, and I'll take you through that. So what's the purpose of it? Well, it's to provide for the entitlement of certain employees to leave for medical care purposes, domestic violence leave, the right to request flexible working arrangements for caring purposes, that's parents and carers, and to provide for the entitlement of employees to request remote working arrangements. And I know we've heard a lot about that recently in the media. So the leave for medical care purposes came into effect on 3rd of January. Again, you should have your policy and communicated that to your employees at this stage. So what does that entitle the employee to? Well, it entitles the employee to 5 days unpaid leave in any period of 12 consecutive months to provide care and support to a care recipient for serious medical reasons. So the care recipient would be the child, the spouse, the civil partner, the co-inhabitant, the parent, the grandparent, the sibling, or the housemate of the employee. That entitlement is on commencement of employment, so there's no service requirement. And interestingly, it's in addition to those existing statutory entitlements to carers leave and force majeure leave. So just for your information, if your employee has taken the leave or intends to take the leave, they should notify the employer as soon as is reasonably practicable. And you as an employer can require evidence from the employee as to the relationship with the person, the nature of the care that they require, and evidence relating to the need of the person. So, for example, maybe a medical certificate. So this is already in place from the 3rd of July. Also, employees are entitled to extend breastfeeding breaks from 26 weeks to 104 weeks. So that's, we know employees are entitled to take daily breaks or a reduction in the working hour of working day of 1 hour. So that extends that entitlement from 26 weeks to 104. And also it extends the entitlement for transgender men to take maternity leave. So these are all the provisions of the Act that are in effect, and those that are not in effect as of yet are, firstly, domestic violence leave. So this has been in the media a lot over the last couple of weeks. Equality Minister Roderick O'Gorman has stated that it's going to be introduced in the autumn, and it's going to provide for the introduction of 5 days of domestic violence leave in any period of 12 consecutive months. He has said that it's to be fully paid by the employer, and that workers, while they will have to disclose the type of leave they're taking, they won't have to provide any evidence of proof of abuse. Now, regulations are currently being developed to set out the rate of pay, and guidance for employers are currently being developed by Women's Aid, which is extremely important, I believe, due to the sensitive nature of the leave. We certainly will need assistance from an employer perspective at what to do. And then we've been talking about the right to request remote working for a while. We're waiting on a new code of practice to be developed by the WRC. But the legislation as written states that an employer will have, or an employee will have the right to request remote work after 6 months of continuous service. They must give the employer 8 weeks notice in writing, and then the employer needs to consider such requests in according with their own needs, the employee needs, and the new code of practice. And the employer can reply in writing within 4 weeks of receiving the request, or they must reply in writing within 4 weeks. And that's either approving the request, and they need to have an agreement between themselves and the employee, or they can refuse the request. If they do, they need to set out the reasons in writing. Alternatively, they can extend that time period to a maximum of 12 weeks if they're having difficulty assessing the viability of the request. And then employees also will have the right to request flexible working arrangements for those with children or those with caring responsibilities if they have to provide caring to support to a person needing it for a serious medical reason. And again, you can see the list of provisions here reflects the right to request remote working, in that the employee has to have 6 months continuous service, they have to give 8 months notice in writing, they have to reply within 4 weeks of receiving the request. And again, the employer must consider the request in accordance with their needs and the employee needs. Now, also the employer may request information in relation to the person to whom the request is made. So for a child, it would be birth certificate, and for a person who's need of care, it would be the relationship again and the medical cert proving the need of the person. So that takes me to the end of recent employment changes. And you can see there's a lot there for employers to think about. And there's a lot of changes they're going to need to make to their contracts and policies and procedures. But just, I am aware of time, Marina. I'm just going to touch extremely briefly, very, very briefly on 3 bills that are currently in the system and due to be enacted in the future. Not sure when as of yet. But the first is that employment permits bill. I know it's going to be very relevant to a lot of employers that are on at the moment on the webinar. And the purpose of it is to make the permit system more responsive to that evolving labour market, so assisting from employers from a recruitment perspective. Now, just to touch on the key provisions of the bill, it's going to consolidate all the current pieces of legislation, which will be very helpful. It's going to introduce 2 new employment permits, a seasonal employment permit and a contract for services permit. It's to simplify the labour market test to reflect modern advertising practices. So the bill as it stands is stating that employers won't have to advertise now in the newspaper the position. It's going to move operational aspects to regulations. So that means that the minister can make changes more quickly to reflect the evolving labour market. And it also will allow the minister to attach conditions such as training or accommodation to the granting of employment permits in certain situations. Now, with regards to the living wage bill, we're all very familiar with that at the moment. But what I wanted just to mention today was that it's been widely reported in the media that the most recent Low Pay Commission report is recommending an increase in the national minimum wage in 2024 of $1.40 an hour, which will bring the national minimum wage to $12.70. And I know that will bring, additional burdens on some employers for sure. And the plan is to have that national minimum living wage in place by 2026, which will replace the national minimum wage. And the long-awaited automatic enrolment retirement savings scheme, the purpose of this is for all workers to have workplace pension in addition to their statutory pension for when they retire. It's expected now to be in place by the end of 2024, and the bill as it currently stands will see everyone earning $20,000 a year and aged between 23 and 26 automatically enrolled in a new retirement savings system where employees don't currently have an occupational pension. Now, there's a lot of work still to do on this bill, but the plan is for it to be gradually phased in. The employer-employee contributions are to be matched, starting at 1.5% of gross salary and ending at 6%. The state is also going to make a contribution, and under certain conditions, as the bill stands, employees can opt out or suspend their contributions, and it's going to be administered by the Central Processing Authority, which is a separate independent body. So that takes me to the end of my presentation. I hope you're a little clear on recent changes to employment law and future changes that are coming up. And again, Marina, I really hope that I didn't go over my time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Catherine. That was perfect. And building a great culture also starts with implementing the right policies and being on track with the latest changes. So thanks for reminding us today on these new changes. And as I said before, the slides and recording will be shared afterwards, so everyone can access all the information that you just shared with us.
Fantastic.
Good. In the chat and Q&A function, I can see there are already some questions, but if you want to ask some questions to Catherine, just put them in the Q&A and the chat so we can answer them hopefully at the end, or we will follow up with you afterwards. And today we're also joined by John Patrick Shaw from Carelon Global Solutions Ireland. John leads Carelon's strategy to build digital tools to simplify healthcare. Prior to joining Carelon, he held senior technology leadership roles for over 20 years in Fiserv, Kingspan, Mainstream, Planet, Primeline, Value Hub, and more. And today, John is here to share with us how they rebranded from Legato to Carelon. Hey, John, thank you for joining. How are you?
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk today with this wonderful audience, Marina. So what I wanted to talk about was the specific journey we've been on as we rebranded, but also maybe to give some pointers for those who are looking at doing something like this as well. Our principle in our company is to think in terms of more than a rebrand. So if you're going to change your brand for whatever reason, whatever business reason, often this will come about as a consequence of an acquisition, a merger. Maybe it's to do with the parent corporation changing direction. There's a lot of different reasons. And rather than just go through the motions of changing the logo on the wall, the wise advice perhaps is to use that as an opportunity to rethink your message, your story, and then get that out. So, more than a rebrand, so to speak. So if you just go to the next slide. Yeah, so you can't really talk about, business in 2023 23 without talking about the impact we've had from COVID. So this was happening while we were looking at rebranding. This was happening as well in parallel, because we don't live in a univariate world. And when you're looking at anything you're doing in business, you don't have the luxury of thinking of one thing only anymore. If there ever was a time like that, it's long gone. So we think today is 24th of August, 2023, but it's not. It's actually 2028. COVID has pushed us all 5 years into the future. Well-being is front and center in our lives in a way that it probably never was before. Working from home is a reality. The Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of stones. So organizations that are obsessed with presenteeism really need to think about that. And when people are talking about getting people back to the office, do you have clear outcomes? Are you sure you understand the effect of that on morale, motivation, and indeed your business? But also, more importantly, perhaps accelerate digitization. We're using Zoom today. Zoom prior to COVID was not widely used. It was out there, as we all know, but technology like that, Microsoft Teams, which we use in our company extensively, one small example of accelerate digitization. But you've seen more recently with AI, with ChatGPT and other things, how we're advancing much faster than anyone would have predicted 5 years ago. It's not all because of COVID, but certainly COVID was a catalyst to accelerate changes that were already underway. In our own domain, we work in healthcare. So Carelon, we build great software and AI solutions for better healthcare. That's what we do. And a big challenge in healthcare is the rising cost. And just to put the sobering statistic up there, the USA is on track to spend 20% of its GDP on healthcare. In 1960, a much smaller GDP, the US back in 1960 was spending only 5% of GDP on healthcare. So that, that's not a sustainable trajectory for any country. We as Carelon, we're in the world of helping address some of those root causes, a focus on shifting to proactive healthcare away from perhaps an overemphasis on reactive approaches. Anyway, just move to the next slide. So what I want to talk about then is, why Carelon, why rebrand at all, and why now? Why do it now? So just to move to the next slide, why Carelon, and then just go again. So in Ireland, we established with our previous brand back in November 2021. We opened for business in 2021. We're an innovation center, a software innovation center. Our parent company is America's largest health insurance provider, Elevance Health. 120 million Americans receive their health insurance from Elevance Health. So we've built a team with very strong capability in artificial intelligence and data science and in software engineering. So while we began with a different brand, from the very start, we were focusing on how do we help our parent company accelerate, better, faster, cheaper, simpler business processes. So moving to the next slide. As I say, we're part of something bigger. So Carelon is not health insurance. We are as I say, a software development company owned by a big health insurance provider. But Carelon, in addition to providing software solutions, we also have specialist capabilities in the world of pharmacy management, behavioral health, and complex care solutions. So prior to the rebrand, these different entities were operating with different brands in the market. And so that was fine for a long time, but ultimately we realized we needed coherence. We needed to be much better at explaining what it is that we do. So by rebranding, by choosing to create a new brand, Carelon, as we did we actually rebranded in January of 2022, over a year after starting in Ireland, right? But by choosing Carelon and ensuring that all of the different components of our business were now under a coherent brand with a coherent message to the market, it's massively helped us as a business. So if you just move to the next slide. So then you say, okay, that's fine, but that leads into why rebrand. If you go to the next slide. So we then look at how we translated that down into what are we doing in Ireland as a software development center. So we had this great opportunity as a consequence of rebranding in January 2022 to tell our story again, and to tell it with a very tight alignment with that bigger picture that I mentioned around, behavioral health, critical care management, and other things. And also it helped us as we were growing our business in Ireland. We were hiring a lot of people. We've gone from, opening in November 2021 to now having 227 people in our team. And having a good reason to explain what it is that we do is very important when you're attracting talent. When we talk about building scalable software platforms, for the people we're hiring, they understand technology, absolutely. But people, when we're hiring them, respond very well to a sense of purpose, some higher purpose that's being served, transforming healthcare, making lives better. It's what we're seeing is that, there are a lot of idealists in the market who want to work for an employer where they feel they're part of a bigger, something of bigger benefit to humanity. So we certainly picked up on that in our, more than a rebrand journey. So moving to the next slide. When you look into the future, then you say, okay, that's wonderful. Where does this all lead to? So, begin with the end in mind. If you can push forward a generation from now and think of what the world will be like in relation to health and well-being, long before 2050, we will be in a world of real-time healthcare monitoring with a focus on proactive measures. And you will have a digital avatar, a digital twin, a digital life with you. So you will be in control of your data securely, but you will know your full pattern of health. You will have a personal understanding of your genetic predispositions, your genetic risk, genomic risk, perhaps the impact. You will understand more about the impact your diet and your exercise are having on your health. So people will live longer and healthier by 2050. Patterns in society will be better understood and reacted to. And because you'll have real-time monitoring and pattern recognition in real time, not only will that inform policy, but it'll also help, prevent many illnesses by detecting them earlier in the wider population. So this is a life cycle approach to health that we'll see long before 2050. Moving to the next slide. However, we are not in that now. We are, the planet we live upon, the civilization we're in is not in that place. We're in a pre-digital world when it comes to healthcare. Information is in silos, it's on paper. Generally, the symptom is looked upon rather than root cause, the problem rather than the system, the data not accessible, diagnosis often tricky. So we're in a reactive world generally in health, and Carelon is part of this change towards that 2050 that I described, where we're looking at predicting, preventing. So as a company in health insurance, our parent company in health insurance is moving towards health assurance, predict and prevent, lifelong health approach. Moving to the next slide. Massive part of this journey is going to be the advance in wearables. Many people on this call have a smartwatch. It's something that, 5 years ago would have been seen as unusual, perhaps. Now it's becoming ubiquitous. And in the same way, many other predictive indicators are being more and more understood, better and better understood, and devices that can help us predict and prevent are becoming more and more wearable. So it's not that we become cyborgs or anything like that. It's more about how do we predict and prevent. And it's not for everybody. Not everybody. And when you look at the diffusion of new ideas, Gordon Moore, not everybody jumps on the innovation early, and some people never jump on the innovation at all. So it's not for everybody, but for those who are thinking about predicting and preventing health issues, living a long and healthy life, this is the domain we're talking about. And then on to the next slide. We already do it with our cars. When you sit into your car and you switch it on, 30 indicators, red, amber, green, you decide what you want to do with that data, but there it is in front of you. So I think future civilizations will look back upon us in 2023 and say, what a strange time it was back then, that people would know more about their car's health than about their own personal health. So just moving on to the next slide. So why now? Just moving again. So this is there's a compelling need to address these challenges. The technology that would have been prohibitively expensive 10 years ago is now accessible. When you think about the cost of computing, the cost of data storage, data communication, it's massively more affordable now than a decade ago. And while a lot of the principles, a lot of the techniques were around a decade ago, they're now accessible for all the reasons around cost and skill base and everything else. So we're here to simplify the complex processes to improve healthcare. We're developing solutions. It's all about technology, in our case here in Carelon, Ireland, to do that. And it's all about making it easier to deliver whole health. So moving on to the next slide, just to talk about our organization in Ireland. I mentioned 227 people in our team. We have 34 nations represented in our team. 44% of our team are female to 56% male. And about 53% of our team are New Irish to 47% Irish. We use the term New Irish. We don't say non-national. We don't say alien. We don't say immigrant. We say New Irish. It's a much more friendly term. After all, who wants to be called an alien, right? Nobody. So the diversity in our team is very strong. And that is something that we have really hugely benefited from by having multiple perspectives on these amazing challenges. And our focus has been on, hiring the best possible people we can find, rather than any bias that might stand in the way of that. And then next slide is it. That's my story on Carelon's rebrand. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks very much. And I'd say it's good to see as well that for a rebrand, it's not only change of the logo, there's a whole process of rethinking it all. So I'm interested to know, how did you involve your employees in the rebranding process, especially across the 34 countries you have? How do you engage them and make sure they're enthusiasts for the new brand?
So in our case in Ireland, we ran a set of workshops with our team around, we put the heading on Think Limitless on that. And it was really about, what is our purpose? So we have a corporate mission and a corporate vision, but localize the purpose. What is our purpose locally, rather than it feels detached. So we personalized it, and we then looked at our company values, which are very dynamic. Inspiring CEO Gail has put together, obviously, as part of a major plan. But we took that locally and said, okay, what are the behaviors that we would expect to see that are congruent with that mission, vision, and set of values? So we brought it into that, and then we also included our team in the messaging and in the journey. So we used LinkedIn extensively, but it was the voice of our own people that we brought to the front all the way.
Very good. And that's for internally. And then externally, have you seen any change in your talent attractiveness in the talent market since the rebranding?
Yeah, I think we did on January the 30th, we did a big event in Thomond Park in Limerick. We created a video. It's on LinkedIn. We had about 250 external guests at that. So we invited our stakeholder community. So at that, we invited all the recruitment agencies we worked with, all the suppliers we work with, all our ecosystem, essentially, were all invited, and many turned up, in addition to all our team at the time. So we opened with a big bang as such. We made a date of it, right? And then we found that put a lot of energy into our market. But also by then, by January 30th, 2022, we'd been in business over a year. So there was a track record that we could build upon. So for people thinking of moving to us, they could check us out and see, okay, I can see there's a history here. Okay, it's only a year, but there is a history. I get a sense of who the team are. So it's the voice of our team on LinkedIn speaking that they could see. So when it comes to social media, the advice is always to pick one channel and become very good at it. So we picked LinkedIn. So our communication channel of choice for social media is LinkedIn.
And you're very good at it. I can say that. And for the social media and other communications that you have for this rebranding, do you use any metrics or indicators to measure the success of the rebranding?
One of the great things about using one platform and getting good at it is that, yeah, we get the data. So we can see, we recently did a post on India Independence Day, for example. One of our team spoke on that, Ruby, and we had 45,000 impressions within a couple of days on that post. Wow. So we know the numbers, we know what's working and what doesn't work. And we post all our vacancies on LinkedIn. So it's a single, one-stop shop for us. We post our vacancies, we tell our story, we get our anything we achieve along the way, we profile that as well.
Very good. And you said that your employees are really involved in all of that. And how do you make sure your existing customer and the wider database and market is aware of your rebranding? How do you communicate that to the world?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is one aspect. I keep saying LinkedIn, but also we have structured relationships with our partners. So our customer, if you like, largely internal, but increasingly external as well. We have an engagement model. So we're creating software, and that's best done when you understand the business challenge. So we put a lot of effort into understanding what are the business challenges, what's the business value of this particular software we're going to build. And then we use a principle on, minimum viable product. So we get you something, version 1, fast, rather than have you waiting 5 years and you get nothing. We give you something fast, and then fast feedback to create version 2, version 3, version 4. Agile software development.
Fantastic. Great. And in all these process of rebranding, can you share a couple of challenges that you had and how you overcame them?
Yeah, well, it was very challenging to go from, we were only new in Ireland. We had just about got everybody to remember what our email addresses were, to know what our company name was, all of that. So suddenly we're changing. So this is a huge disruption. Now we could throw our hands up in despair and say, oh my God, how are we going to do this? Or make something of it. So what we decided to do was go big, go noisy, go large with it. A big launch event, make a big event out of it. We had to hold back for a big reveal, which was a challenge as well. Don't tell anyone about it until the day, right? So nobody knew. And then on the day, our email had changed, our logo in our office on the wall changed, our ecosystem got told on the day, this is what we're doing. And but most importantly, as I say, more than a rebrand. So tell our story. What are we going to do differently as a business, and bring our people on the journey, as I say, by having those structured workshops. So we're engaging. How do we localize this? What does our own team think about this? How do we make it real in terms of, look, it's not just swapping a logo.
Yeah, and it looks like it's more than a rebranding. It's more like a repurposing of a business, and that's a lot of change as well.
Yeah, and that's why we started with purpose. Very, very, yeah, absolutely. We started with that very important thing. What's our purpose here? To use technology to make lives better. Let's talk about that primarily, and use the opportunity when people are asking us about it to make sure that's the message that people get, and that important message is out there.
Perfect. Thanks so much, John. I took a lot to note myself as a marketer, so thanks for that. And we'll be sharing slides and a recording afterwards for them, for those who are interested. And we have 10 more minutes for questions. I know we received a lot for Catherine and John in the Q&A and the chat, starting with some questions around probation period in the Q&A function. Catherine, if you want to take those.
Yeah, so there's quite a few in relation to probationary periods, and I can certainly understand why, because it definitely, the wording of this legislation definitely is presented us with some challenges in interpretation. And as we know, in order for us to interpret law, we need case law. And we don't have case law at the moment. So there's lots of discussions over and back as to what it means in the regulation. So a lot of questions around extension of probationary periods. Can I extend a person's probationary period? So the only time the regulations mention the word extension is in relation to where an employee is absent due to a specified provision, then the probationary period can be extended for the duration of that specified provision. And the specified provision, like I said earlier, is those adoptive or is those protective leave. So maternity leave, adoptive leave, parents leave, paternity leave, parental leave, carers leave. So all those leaves, that's what it's saying. So that's exactly what the legislation states, that for the duration of the absence, that can be extended. However, we note that it also says that the probationary period can be longer on an exceptional basis. So that means it must be an exceptional circumstance where such a longer period doesn't exceed 12 months and where it would be the interest of the employee. Now, as I say, how we interpret legislation is based on case law. And as we don't have any at the minute, we're not able, we don't fully mean or are fully able to interpret that clause as is in terms of what it means. So while I would say that you can certainly put both clauses in your contracts, I would definitely exercise caution when considering extending a probationary period for any other reason than for an absence due to a specified provision. And the safest approach is only to extend probationary period for this reason until we have case law. That's not giving you a straightforward answer. Sometimes with legislation, you can't until this case law comes in and we can see how WRC are going to adjudicate. But that's the safest option. So I see lots of questions coming in around that. And that's what I would advise at this stage. And it's what, yeah, absolutely. That's all I think I can say on that.
Great. And do you want to go through a couple more questions? I'm conscious.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I just see that Martina, you've written just to advise if you provide a full written contract with all these details, then you do not need to do 5-day and 1-month statement, and the WRC have confirmed this in a written query, and you're absolutely correct. So I always say best practice advice I give to my clients is to get the full contract of employment out to your employees within the first 5 days. And once you do that, you don't have to be worrying about what 10 clauses do I have to have within, or what 5 terms do I have to have in with the first 5 days, and now what's the remainder of the terms that I have to have in for the 1-month statement. Now, ideally, again, I would be saying give the employee their contract before they start employment. So thank you for that, Martina, and thanks for reminding me to just advise the audience on that. Now, somebody is asking me here, when an employee is employed on a casual contract, how is the daily rate of sick pay calculated? Again, very good question. So we know that the maximum that employer is to pay the employee is the lesser of €110 or 70% of the employee's daily rate. So what you would do is, if you have the casual employee rostered on that particular day, then you would pay the lesser of 70% of the rostered hours, or €110, whichever of those is the lesser. So you would look at the rostered hours and pay them in regards to that. There's also a question around do transparent and predictable working conditions apply to all employees? Again, that's a very good question. They actually don't. So again, thanks for that question. So basically, they don't apply to those that work an average of 3 hours or less per week, or that have 4 weeks, less than 4 weeks continuous service. Some of those provisions also don't apply to seafarers and fishermen. And also, if the employment is governed by a collective agreement, some of the provisions don't apply. So in particular, parallel employment, mandatory training, probationary periods, and the right to transfer to more secure and predictable employment. And you don't mind, just one more question there that I'd be happy to answer with regard to flexible working arrangements. If it's to care for a child, then when do they end? So the legislation states that the end when the child reaches the age of 12. It also goes on to state that if a child has a disability or long-term illness, the flexible working arrangement will end when the child reaches the age of 16 or earlier if they no longer have the disability or the long-term illness. Okay. And also with regards to a child that's subject of an adoption order, and on or before the date of making the order, if the child has reached the age of 10 but they're under 12, then the flexible working arrangement will end 2 years after the date of that adoption order.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Catherine. I know we have a lot of questions. We also have questions for John. One that I really like is, have you kept your values, some of your values and culture from Legato to Carelon?
Yes. So the essential culture of our company is the same. Right? It didn't change. However, what we did do was take the opportunity to go through a set of workshops on the behaviors that bring those values alive. So rather than have the values up on the wall, how do we know they're happening behaviorally? And one of the things that I would have heard a number of years ago was that if you walk into a place and you see the values on the wall, that's not a good thing. It should be more alive than the need to put it up on the wall.
Exactly. Thanks for that. And we have a lot of more questions. We couldn't go through them all today, but John's and Catherine LinkedIn profile will be linked in the email follow-up that you will receive today. So make sure that you connect with them if you have more questions. And thanks very much for joining. We know that managing change in the workplace is not easy for HR and marketing leaders, and we must stay up to date and involve our people in the process to keep high trust levels in our workplace culture. So thanks very much for joining today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and keep an eye on your emails as you will receive the follow-up. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.